Welcome back to the Contacts Coaching Podcast. We are joined by the legend, Bill Baxter, current assistant coach at Folsom Lake College women's basketball, former associate head coach at Sac State women's basketball, and former head women's basketball coach at El Camino High School, where he won multiple NorCal championships and a state championship. Coach, finally pinned you down and got you on so we can offer up your wisdom to the rest of the basketball world.
Yeah, whoever thought this day would come, but you were persistent, and I reached out and you nailed me.
Absolutely. I tricked you into it, but here we go. Let's talk through this thing. And as you know, having listened to a handful of these, we always kind of start with a background and a grounding session for the audience. And what I would love to hear from you on this, because most people aren't aware of it, is your experience with sports other than basketball as you were coming along in your journey. So just make sure you drop that in there, how you were the swim coach at one point, as well as you talk about, hey, how'd you get into coaching to begin with? How did you end up where you are right now? And any steps you think are pertinent in between.
Okay. And I'm going to try and give you the Reader's Digest version of this. Let me start with mentioning, and you know this, but your people listening probably don't. This is my 51st year of coaching. And I'm sure other people have done that many or more, but it's just what I do. So there's probably a few more years coming up. So like you, I'm a former Aggie. I played junior college basketball first at American River, then for Bob Hamilton, UC Davis. 1972, my eligibility ran out and I graduated. And I had to decide what I was going to do. But before I even did that, because I had no clue, that Bob Hamilton offered me an assistant coach to coach with him. And at that time, there was the Lou Alcindor rule, where freshmen could not play varsity basketball for a few years. And so UC Davis also had a freshman team. So he goes, you're going to be my assistant during the varsity game, but you're also going to be the head coach for the freshman team. So I didn't know I was going to be a coach, but all of a sudden I was one. And I couldn't have a better mentor, as all of the previous coaches before Bob Hamilton had been for me. And so I did that for 2 years. And then I got my teacher credential while I was doing that. And I was ready for a full-time job. I do know that coaching is a full-time job, but I needed one that paid. And therefore got my teaching credential at El Camino High School, where you have also been, and started there, student taught there in spring of 74. And then they hired me on as a teacher in fall of 74 and promptly got me a coaching job that had nothing to do with basketball. And I'm not saying that a coach can't coach a lot of sports, but the last on my list was probably the water polo and swim coach. And so they told me that was part of the job. And I promptly informed that I knew nothing about either sport. So they go, do you want the job or not? I told them, I'm your guy. And so immediately I drove home and then drove back over to Davis, which is about 30 minutes from my house, and met with a guy named Jerry Hinsdale, who's the head water polo coach at UC Davis. He informed me that I could run all my basketball stuff in the pool. So just develop different terminology. So we didn't have a point guard. We didn't have a post player. For example, a post player is called a hole set in water polo. Anybody that knows water polo would know that. I had no clue. He told me to run my fast break stuff, but don't call it a fast break, call it a counterattack. And therefore, I learned from that. And I was running basketball stuff while I bought every championship production video and book I could on the sport of water polo. So did that for 14 years. In the spring, they needed the swim coach to be, the water polo coach. So I inherited men's and boys and girls swimming. The good news is at El Camino High School, it's a upper middle class neighborhood where a lot of recreational swimmers that are pretty good attend there, as well as multiple swimmers from a club called Arden Hills Swimming and Tennis Club, which are Olympic caliber athletes. So I was instantly an excellent swim coach. So over the 14 years I also did that, the swim team went from a good number of 30 or 40 people to 200 people. 80 boys and 120 girls were on our swim team at El Camino High. Nobody has 200 people on a swim team. So did all those, and you go, well, what happened to basketball? Well, I missed basketball in the winter. So in 74, I did water polo in the fall. I was the assistant men's basketball coach at Consumnes River College, a JC in South Sac. And then I'd drive over there after school and come back. And then in spring, I did swimming. And I did that for 2 years. And then in 76, I got out of basketball coaching and just did the water polo and swimming. So you want me to continue?
There's like smoke coming out of my head right now. And I do want you to continue, but I'm very curious, and this will probably be an off-camera conversation of how you had a 200-member swim practice in that pool.
Do you want the quick? Okay, I'll give you the real quick version. Okay, doing all that stuff for the school, and we're very successful in both sports. The principal was an AD were on my side. That's two good people to have on your side. So my 6th period class, rather than a PE class, became swim team. So now we could start at 1:45 instead of 3 o'clock. So that was one group. And then there was group 2, group 3, and group 4, affectionately known as the turtles, the people that were learning how to swim. There were 50 in each group. So in a 6-lane, little 25-yard pool, we put 8 in a lane for 4 straight practices. And I went home at 6:30 at night.
There you go, people. Don't ever say it can't be done. How resourceful are you? All right, so back to the journey, Coach.
Okay, so 76, I still thought I was a great basketball player, which I had never been in the first place. So I played a lot of rec leagues from 76 to 80. And several of my co-coaches at El Camino, who you would remember, Fred Gibson, Frank Calcona of different sports, were also refereeing basketball, high school basketball in the winter. Come and ref with us. You're the only one of us that knows anything about basketball. Why aren't you reffing? And I go, in 80, I said, okay, I'll go and ref. So I started reffing high school, got some great contacts, and a guy named Dan Hooper, who was a big referee guy in the Sacramento area, Jim Jorgensen, who was an assigner. I did a pretty good job, and I understand the sport and whatever. I just had a good demeanor to be a referee, worked my way up. And then I started working Division II games in the Far Western Conference. And then in 1987, 7 years later, I was getting Pac-10 non-league games and working with guys like Richie Ballesteros, Bob Garibaldi, Charlie Range. These are all old-time Pac-10 guys. And in 87, basketball made a comeback. So we had a vice principal named Dick Kelly. He called me into his office one day and says, Coach, I need you to become a basketball coach here. And I go, you have 2 basketball coaches, the boys and the girls. Which one is this? And he goes, girls. I go, wow. So what's Ted going to do? Ted was a history teacher on campus. Well, Ted said he'd retire if you took the job. But otherwise he's going to keep coaching, and he won 2 games last year. So if you'll take it, Ted won't be there anymore. So I go, okay, but I want to talk to Ted because I'm not taking Ted's job. So he agreed. He goes, no, please do it. He goes, I think you'd be good for him, and so on and so forth. So I took the job in 1987. So here's a picture of 1987. Fall, water polo. Winter, girls basketball for the first time. Still a Pac-10 and Far Western Conference basketball official after practice, and swimming in the spring. And my daughter was born. Tough year. So we got through that. My wife, who's also a PE teacher and coach, you know, Michelle, she suggested I drop a couple of those. So I dropped water polo and swimming and just did basketball at the high school for the girls. And I refereed to 1990. 1990, our son, Kyle, who you coached, was born. Now we have 2 kids. Michelle's suggestion I drop another one of those 2 things. So I dropped the refereeing and stayed on. I was supposed to be the girls basketball coach for 1 season, 87, 88. And I coached basketball there for the next 24 years till I retired. Also became the athletic director, like you know that job now, from 1994 to 2011. And then left there for 1 day, got the assistant job at Sac State for 10 years, left there for 1 day, and now I've been the assistant at Folsom Lake on my 2nd year. End of story.
Again, there's smoke coming out of my ears, and we could have a 10-part series on this thing and tell stories about the El Camino era, but that's super helpful in framing how we got to where we are. And it's actually good context for some of the things I want to talk to you about. So this show, if you remember its infancy, when I first tried to get you on in like the first 10 episodes and you kept giving me the Heisman, was designed to be a digital database of mentorship for current coaches, but ideally the market was people just getting into the business, right? So like when I came to you, right, I had Coach Williams, I had Coach Fogel, and then it was like, okay, what's my mentorship group look like outside of you and them? How can I expand the reach? And that's the design here. And since you've got a background in multiple things, I think this question is even more pertinent for you. And you're going to have to do the Reader's Digest version on a lot of this, but we will start with when you picked up polo and you decided, okay, I need to go over and talk to the Davis coach. I need to watch all these videos. I need to immerse myself in the sport. What are some things that no matter what you did, you still couldn't get your head wrapped around how to make them work, either over the course of that 14 years in swimming and polo or just in its infancy before you finally figured it out? But regardless of whatever you kept trying, you were still struggling with a few things that you couldn't get your head wrapped around.
I think my best thought there, Justin, is I try to do what I told the kids every day. Just get a little bit better every day. So you're right. I didn't know a thing, but I knew my kids could swim fast. And that suited my personality basketball wise anyway, because I always want to be the aggressor, the attacker, the more energetic. That's just my culture of any team I coach. We're not going to sit back and try and defend or stop you, even though defense is one of my claims to fame. But we're going to do all those things aggressively. So okay, I learned they could swim fast. Now, what do I do next? So I'd read a little bit more in my book, look at another video, and then every time we played somebody, I go, wow, look at what they just did to us. Let me incorporate that into my practice so we can get a little bit better and get a little closer to the level they're at. So I just pursued that for 14 straight years.
How would you say that naivete, so to speak, of realizing right away that you didn't know anything about the sport, how would you say that, one, served your growth in polo and swimming, but two, carried with you once you shifted back to basketball, a sport that you theoretically knew? How would you say that beginner's mind helped you throughout your career?
Wow, you're good at this. This has worked in some really good questions, because thinking back on that, I think the worst thing you can think is you know everything about a sport and can't ever learn anything more. I'm in my 51st year, and I took a whole page full of notes while at practice today on our practice plan when I wasn't the guy on stage or when I was just a helper or just sitting out watching somebody else coach. And I tried to make myself a better coach so I could help the individual girls, my head coach, the other assistants, and our team be a better team. So I think you can never be the person that thinks they know it all. And if you know a lot, try and learn more. And if you have you know absolutely nothing about. Or the best situation for me was knowing nothing, because then I will look foolish if I go to practice every day and I'm supposed to be the coach. I have to know something, even if it's very little, and I have to get better every day. So I worked at it nonstop, kind of like making a lesson plan. Because I don't know if you knew, there was one time they asked me to teach French besides all those other jobs I described.
Do you even
And I
speak
go,
French?
I took French in high school, of course, but what do you learn in high school French? So they go, do you want it was the same story all over again. Do you want the job or not? Okay, I'm your French guy. So I was basically in the language lab a lot because you could play the records and they'd listen. And then I had an assistant that helped me with papers and everything. And I taught French 1, which I could get through because I was a day ahead of them. And French 2 was a tad difficult. So basically, knowing nothing is a blessing in coaching, because now you know you have to learn something or everything every day.
No, I love that approach. And it seems like being thrust into those situations early created an insatiable thirst for learning more stuff as you got into the thing that in theory you had a good foundation in. What would you say if you could pinpoint a handful of seminal moments in regards to this was a transformational shift that I made because I was willing to learn something different in any of the sports you coached, even up until today, right? So 51 years in, I can pinpoint these are 3 things that really shifted the way in which I approached coaching because of X.
I think I could sum it down to one that would cover all those scenarios. So every day, work to get better, learn more, try the stuff you learned at practice, see what works, doesn't work, adapt, try and make it progressive. So you have progressive teaching, adding more things to it. And then sure enough, no matter what you thought you learned, somebody punches you in the face. So we'd go play somebody, and this actually happened. So when I took over in '87, the girls basketball team at El Camino, they had won 2 games the year before.
Mm-hmm.
We went 18-13 and made the playoffs. And we lost on a buzzer beater, but we made the playoffs. So, okay, I'm doing pretty good at this. It's this area I know. So that's why I came back for a second year. By 91, we won our first 31 games in a row. We were 31-0 and one of the top teams in NorCal, if not the state. I go, wow, we made a lot of progress. A team punched us in the face. What did they do to us? They ran and jumped us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What I had been running was the wooden 2-2-1.
Mm-hmm.
Control the tempo, which wasn't the tempo I even wanted, but that's the press I knew. And I had never taken any farther. And we'd won several games up to that point, and we were 31-0 in that year, 91.
Mm-hmm.
And in the NorCal playoffs, we lost our one and only game, because when you lose, you're done, as you know.
Yep.
And so they beat us by 35. So there was 2 brothers in Northern California coaching at that time. They were the Phelps brothers. One of them coached Bishop O'Dowd boys, and this was Moreau Catholic.
Right.
So I'm not shy about learning, as you told that water polo, swimming, basketball. I just want to get better. So I called him up. What did you do to us? I had no idea what he even did to us.
Right.
All I knew is we had what must have been 127 turnovers. So I go, do you mind teaching me that? So, like you and I were talking earlier, he taught me run and jump. And then I went and got Eddie Andrus video on run and jump, another book on run and jump. And then I made it my own, and I made it my version. And then we became famous for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then 94, we happened to be the team that kept winning and other teams were losing. So I had an insatiable urge. And I think it was kind of a fear factor.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to fail.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to fail. and I wanted to give those kids the best thing we could to be successful. Sure, I wanted to win, but it was more for them, like it always should be, I think. And so I just had to keep getting better, whatever it took. So when you get, you're progressing, but when you get punched in the face, then you have to take a huge jump and do something better than you've ever done it before.
No, I love that story because ultimately the example I would have given you was when before we went down to Pepperdine, we went to Davis to listen to Vance speak. It was a shift for me that I've been with ever since. And you have these moments where it's like, oh, okay, this is what's kind of been calling me, and this is how we're going to be authentic to ourselves and still kind of coach in the best interest of the students. What else would you say over your course of time where you've had some very specific shifts in approach, let's call it, and if you can identify the reason why? Now, this doesn't have to be X's and O's. This could even be in just how you approach coaching in general, but can you maybe identify a few moments where you shifted your approach? I used to do this and now I'm over here, be it X's and O's or even in how you interacted with the athletes?
Yeah, I think I can give you a couple of examples of that. So thank God it doesn't happen every year where you get punched in the face, because you'd probably give up the fight if you get punched enough. But in '94, the current athletic director at that time, Jim Camino, asked me to follow him around and learn what an athletic director does for spring semester because he was retiring. And I go, why would I be doing that? I have enough to do. And that was the year we were just coming off a state title, undefeated season. So I go, okay, I'll follow you around, because he wanted me to be the next AD. So I followed him around. I go, this job sucks. I go, who would ever want to do this? He goes, somebody like you. And so I go, okay. And so talk about getting punched in the face. The first year I was the AD. Now I learned a lot about interactions with parents and kids. So that affected my basketball coaching and the way I approached our culture and pre-knowledge to the kids and the parents, so we knew what we're in. So all of a sudden we were having parents meetings, and I tried to encourage everybody else to do those things. And we had a contract that you signed with all the information about the commitment you were making and all those things. So that was another feel good moment. Oh, okay, I got to get a whole lot better or I'm underwater here. And then as few more instances like that came at El Camino High. I'd go watch other people's practices, like I'm sure you do, and I think you were doing that today again too. And I'd watch a football practice, which probably has very little to do with a basketball practice, but it has everything to do with a basketball practice. So I'd watch that coach, and a lot of times when I went to their practices, I was the bearer of bad news. On your paperwork, it's not good, or that kid's ineligible. We have to forfeit that.
Right.
That's the bad part of the job. But then I'd hear the terminology that coach was using with his kids, or the way he went about things, and we'd have conversations. Because whenever I was on my way to their practice, they started calling me the Grim Reaper, because things were not going to things were not going to go well. So I learned to give them a reward. Hey, before you call me the Grim Reaper, I found $100 in my budget. What would you like to buy for your program?
Right.
So I felt like Santa Claus rather than the Grim Reaper.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned from that what I could do for not only their sports, but for my own team.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the next punch in the face was when I retired from high school, which I never thought I'd do, and got a job the very next day as the defensive coordinator on the women's basketball team at Sac State. And then I go, wow, this is a different level where I've been. And this is a full-time job. And then after about 4 years of that, we don't want you to do defense anymore. You're the offensive coordinator. Like, oh, wow. And that's when I went back to the 4 out, 1 in from Vance Wahlberg that we had learned many years before. So every step I took was because I had to quite quickly and then over time raise myself to the next level of being competent, at least in what I was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, let me go back a little bit on this because what I have been pounding the soapbox on for a while is how much you can learn watching other sports. And I think as coaches, we tend to stay in our bubble, right? And in our lane. And it's like, all right, I'm going to go to this basketball clinic, this one, this one, this one. But you just mentioned I'm out at football practice, has nothing to do with basketball, but it has everything to do with basketball. What's the best thing that you've learned that you can remember watching another sport that you've then stolen and implemented into your approach?
Um, if you're asking me for the very best thing, which I think was in that question, the very best thing was getting myself a better demeanor as a coach with players and or parents or with fellow staff members on my staff or whatever,
Mhm.
how to include assistants, how to give them a role. Learned that from football.
Mhm.
Wow, you let all those people do those things for you? Because I always thought I had to do the whole thing.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, my assistants were getting all kinds of responsibilities they've never had before. And I enjoyed that time. Now I got to watch them coach and they got to grow.
Mhm.
And then their demeanor with their players, because you've seen me coach.
Mhm.
I'm I'm as intense as I am aggressive. Okay,
Very
and I
excitable, let's call it.
that's yeah, and I never picture myself as abusive, and I don't think anybody would say I ever was, because that's not how you keep a job. But I was totally into it. I
Mhm.
had been a I've been a high school and college ref, so I was in my mind a better ref than anybody that ever refed our games, and so on and so forth. And quite often I was right, but I learned that I wasn't going to win even when I was right. So from all those different practices of watching coaches' demeanor, watching their interactions with their kids, watching their terminology, I'd go back and think, how every time, how can I incorporate that to make myself a better coach, a better person, a better individual, and make my program a better one for the sport I'm actively involved in?
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. And what I love is the football analogy of delegation. And you also brought that up when you got to college, you were a coordinator. And it's something I've been mulling over lately, like how to build that into a basketball scheme where you have coordinators like it's a football program. Um, Talk to me a little bit about what that's like, right? Going from, okay, I'm in charge of the whole program, trying to do everything myself, to now I'm actually a coordinator on this side, then I'm a coordinator on the other side. But talk about how that would work in a basketball program at a level that I don't have the right word and I don't want to use functional here, but if you could mastermind it, what would be the best way to make that functional so that it adds value rather than takes it away? And I'm not asking that to downplay what you accomplished or not in your college experience, but I'm just trying to give you kind of the Lord and Master of all. If you had a magic wand, this is where this would be useful. This is where it's kind of a reach based on your experience over the last 15 years.
Um, if I'm reading your question correctly, okay, I think people really enjoy a responsibility and they cherish it and they run with it and they have the time to put into that area, no matter how big or small it might be, than you would ever trying to do every single little thing for your entire program. And then through communication with that person, because as a head, I think one thing I did well was I was pretty good with communication with my assistants between before practice, during practice with always a written plan in everybody's hand, and after practice in what went well for us and what not, and how do I adjust for tomorrow. Basically, like a lesson plan you do for any class, but you have input from other people who are right there with you. And I think everybody wants a role.
Mhm.
I don't care how big or small it is. Like, you're in charge of tightening the bolts on the ball cart and make sure they all have 7 to 9 pounds of air.
Right.
Good, I got a job and I'm
Right.
going to do a good job of that. And I think I became a better coach and I watched them become better coaches and watched us all become more invested in what we were doing.
Great. And what about your experience as a coordinator at the college level, right? If you could take charge of that situation, how would you utilize that approach moving forward, right? If you were back in the head coach's chair, would you have coordinators? Is it something that's like, it was cool to be able to do that as an assistant, but as a head coach, I don't necessarily think it's the best plan. What are your thoughts on having offensive and defensive coordinators in basketball? And actually, how do you even make that work? It's not like you get stop time like in football when you change possessions. Basketball is back and forth.
Right. And I've had to do that because almost my whole life, like I've never interviewed for a job, but yet I've had plenty of jobs because, okay, as soon as like I got the water polo swim job by accident. I got, I became the basketball coach like by accident. I went on to college just because it was there at the time. And then becoming an assistant for the first time after 37 years of being a head coach, everybody goes, you're going to be the worst assistant in the whole wide world because you can't shut up. And I go, no, I can be a very good assistant in my mind because I'm knowledgeable in several areas.
Mhm.
I want to learn all the time. I'm a pleaser. So I
Mhm.
want to please my head coach and I want to do a good job for these kids. So I think we're never going to do anything we've done over again. You get one chance and it's on to the next day.
Mhm.
But I would be even a better person in high school at giving everybody a role, everybody a responsibility, make it quite active. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, they could freely exchange any idea with me,
Mhm.
whether it was a good one or a bad one or anything. And then we'll make a group decision. And as the head coach, you're kind of stuck. Like I listened to your Brandon Laird podcast the other day.
Mhm.
That change in seats, he's right. But he went from assistant to head. I
Mhm.
went the other direction,
Mhm.
head to assistant. So I was going to make sure my head coach looks better than all the other head coaches in the world. I
Mhm.
don't need credit for it. I just need a role. I want to contribute the best I can. And if they give me a new role, now I'm going to try and do my best at that to make all of us successful.
What was the hardest thing about shifting from the head coach seat to the assistant chair?
Um, I'd say probably the times that I become stubborn and I see them that they should probably, in my opinion, and I don't think I'm overboard on this, maybe at least try an idea I've suggested, and they don't want to listen whatsoever.
Mhm.
And then I watch them fail and try and stick with it and make better. Whereas maybe just give it a shot or whatever. Maybe I need to state it in a different way or work with you in a different method that you would consider at least doing this. Because now the other kind of title I've given myself, because all titles are self anointed, okay, besides an assistant, besides a coordinator of this or that, I hopefully am a mentor for the people I work for.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? Because most of the time you think about mentorship as somebody that is higher up the food chain than you in theory. But I remember specifically when I got the AD job, I hired Jim Forkham to come and mentor me as an assistant AD because he has so much more experience, right? I got you on speed dial. I got the guy who's at the rival school next door on speed dial. But it's like, can you talk about how that mentor mentee relationship works when you are not necessarily in the role of kind of higher up the ladder on the organizational leadership chart? What does that look like kind of leading from the back?
Yeah, and I don't know if this specifically answered your question, but I think you're committing a huge mistake if you don't have several mentors, no matter who you are. Like the reason I'm on your podcast today is because I reached out to you because I wanted to learn more about basketball, and you've been influential in my life, giving me your ideas, truth, and I know every time it's honest and truthful, and you give me thoughts, and then okay, Baxter might use that, he might not, but I told him what I believed. And I have a not a large group, but several people that are my go-tos what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Let me share this idea with you. And once you try it, when you improve on it way better than I ever did, I want you to give back by giving me the better idea that you'll add to that. So, as a mentor, in fact, your listeners can't see this, but I'm holding up to you a sheet of paper. That's today's practice plan. If you look carefully, my notes are all over it. And then you can look at the back. So that's what I did at practice today. So now tonight, I'll put my notes in a readable version and text them to my head coach. And I'm always very considerate of how I'm presenting the information that I watch. Like drill number 1, 3 stars. This is awesome. Have you thought about adding these types of things that could make the drill progress so we could do it a second day and get closer to using the drill into actual game plays. So I'm actually big on drill progression, whether it's the same drill and adding to it or different drills. And at Sac State, we developed this term, and we didn't develop it. I'm sure somebody else already did, but we called wrapping myelin around it. So if you got a nerve fiber and a brain thought's going to that muscle, if we wrap myelin around that nerve fiber and make the drill closer to the real game, I think the drills connect to the game, whereas otherwise the drill's over here. And what's that have to do with playing basketball? So if you can discover what that is, you're one hell of a good coach. So we constantly work towards it.
Okay. Let me ask this then, because you just had my brain go down a different rabbit hole here. And it's more about the concept of drills versus playing. And how would you say, as you've dabbled now, right? Long, super successful high school career, 10 years at the Division I college level. Now you're at the JC level. How do I ask this appropriately? What can you identify and share about the difference in teaching or coaching at said theoretical different levels? And as a secondary question, did your approach to progressive teaching change depending on what level you're at?
Well, there's wow. There's different levels of understanding with everything you're coaching, certainly from a freshman high school level to a D1 player that's got a full ride. But the same token, there are so many similarities, it's astounding to me. So therefore, it's the drill. A drill is no good unless it turns into playing. So a drill is not playing at all. It's too structured. But you want the drills and wrapping them in myelin to have structure to your ability to play. And Michelle gave me a great term the other day, my lovely wife that you know that keeps me in line and going. It's called all about limited choices. Because I'm not going to tell anybody exactly what to do, because now you just ruin their ability to play. However, if you give them limited choices, well, you could do this, here, or that, and there is no wrong answer, but some answers might be more right than others, but it's different for every individual. Because another thing I did, and I think you knew this, I taught adaptive PE as well, special education, which made me one of the most creative coaches that I ever could have been, because I had to make blind kids play archery. I had to make deaf kids communicate with each other in a sport. Mm-hmm. So through doing all those things, orthopedically handicapped, do jazzercise. Mm-hmm. But by doing all those things, how can I make these kids feel like every other kid? And they're also getting all the same teaching, but through different methods all at once. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what's helped me, is the creativity.
Yep. And I love that so much so that I'm going to test your memory here. Is there anything that you remember as an aha moment working with your adaptive PE kids that has been transformational in how you approach other things you teach, like basketball or polo or whatever it was, where it was such a trigger moment for you that allowed you to maybe connect dots that you hadn't been able to connect before with kids?
Oh, if and I think you're kind of alluding to adaptive PE stories of the things the kids did.
No, it's more
That's
like coach, you're dealing with, to your point, a group that has an orthopedic challenge and you got to get them to do something. And I guess it's more along the lines of people's learning styles and how we normally will come into a situation. It's like, yo, this is how I'm going to teach, and everybody's going to get it or they're not, and that's too bad. Right. Whereas an adaptive PE teacher, not only do you have to be creative, you're probably also much more alert to different approaches to learning. And so it's more about the question of, sure, some story that maybe informed your approach to coaching your basketball team because of something you learned working through something with your adaptive PE kids.
on my train of thought that I'm having right now. I'm not going to give you a specific instance, but I think it's about this. No matter who you're teaching or coaching or what the level is, from highly advanced to, hey, I just want to be able to play, I think it's all about having fun. So if you're making it fun and enjoyable, and you can smile and laugh with them and get interactions back and forth between the group of people you're in with everybody in the room, no matter what you're teaching or coaching, I think you're being successful. So I've had millions of aha moments, and I don't know the one you're thinking about right now, but those kids taught me how to enjoy myself and realize that they were having a blast. And if I thought they, gosh, I wish they could. We weren't about winning games or doing that. We were just about enjoying ourselves, do what the so-called regular kid did. And a lot of my adaptive kids are more regular than a regular kid. Okay. Then I was being successful and they were being successful, and we were having a good time the whole time we were doing it.
Yeah, I didn't have a moment that I was thinking about as much as it became very apparent to me as my own children were getting older and I was trying to work on things with them about how their learning styles can be different, where Kaylee's very literal. And so anything you explained, it became a challenge of limited choice, like Michelle said, where if you gave her too much, it regressed because she'd be trying to do it all, right? Whereas Sid was much more conceptual. So it'd be like nod and then just kind of figure it out on her own, which, didn't occur to me until my own children are probably 7, 8, 9. And so it was more the ask of how that translated to your other teaching. But now that you brought up that other deal, how do you make sure, since it all comes back to fun, how do you make sure that's showing up every day at your practices and in your games, both as an assistant and as a head coach? Are there specific things that you could offer that are ways in which it's fun?
Um, I almost everything we do is competitive in any drill. There's a score kept to something. There's a way of doing it. There's ways. We really celebrate successes. Huge. It's a big deal. You better have fun, and we minimize consequences for losing, even though it might be, and so much sometimes the consequence is silly rather than an actual consequence or whatever. And sometimes we kind of flip the roles, whereas if you win, you get to do more, and the people that lost don't have to do a thing. They go, wait, we won, why are we running? I go, that's what you won. You won the right to do more conditioning. So the whole, and they're just going, that's not right. And then I found as I'm kind of the grandpa figure now. So my current girls players, and the girls in junior college are a little whacked anyway, but they mimic my actions or whatever, because I'm like the grandfather to all them. So I can do things that maybe a 30-year-old couldn't do, because they'd go, why is that person saying that to me or what? And when I say it, they think it's funny. They're having a blast. So it's all about where you are in age and what you've done and how you interact with them.
I love it. I can only imagine. All right, let me pivot. Let me pivot to administrative thinking here, and if you don't mind, for people that may be listening or not, when you would meet with a new head coach, and it's been a while, but let's say you're putting your AD hat back on, and you got called into the job because the guy left or the gal left or whatever it was. what would you say are the first things that you would tell a new coach? Hey, I don't care what you do, it's your team, it's your program, but you need to make sure X, Y, and Z get done and get done well.
If you want X, Y, and Z, I'm thinking X and Y right away.
X and Y works great.
Okay. And if I think of Z, I'll bring that too. Number one, I want you to be organized. Okay. I want you to be organized. You may know your sport inside out. You may just be starting like the water polo coach I knew at one time, but be organized. Number two, you need to be a communicator, and not just with the kid, not just with the kid and their parent, not just with the kid, the parent, and the administrator, but the custodians at this campus better be on your side. The secretaries, if you interact with them, they better be on your side. In fact, those two groups I just mentioned are the most important people in this whole school. And if you don't have them on your side, you're losing the battle. So organization, communication, and then if I had to give you a Z, and it's the last thing and it's far below the others, but it is helpful either if you're a constant learner or you have quite a bit of knowledge about your sport and are willing to give them, the kids that you're coaching are in charge of, expertise and an IQ in that area.
For sure. No, I think those are all super important. And to your point, communication, it's not just about one set of stakeholders that you have to communicate with. It is the entire ecosystem of the institution. And then I would even say beyond that, right, in our school district, we had 9 schools, right, working with them as well, not just the people on your campus, right? And how do you facilitate that? All right. Let me ask one more question because I'm always curious about this. And with you specifically, I'm sure I'll get an answer that's pretty relevant. But I've been asking people lately, and you've heard this on there. What have you most recently changed your mind on? And I always try to tease this out where it doesn't have to be about basketball, but if you want it to be, that's great. What I'm really looking for is that growth mindset piece of, look, I used to be over here and pretty dug in on this, whatever this is, but now I'm over here and here's why. Here's what caused me to change my opinion. And so, like, if you think about it in regards to anything, right? It could be parenting, grandparenting, your project, cutting the hedges, whatever it might be. But it's like, what's the most recent pivot you can think about where you were like, God, what? How did I ever think that when this is really what it's about?
Well, here's my best thought on that. Obviously, for 51 years, I put a lot of energy and effort and time into coaching. There's a lot more things in the world than coaching. So in that vein, sometimes you go, I should just retire. And then Michelle and I could do all the things that she'd like to do because she's a retired teacher coach as well, who has no interest in working ever again. Whereas if I don't have a project or a team to coach or whatever, I go crazy. I can't just sit here. Okay. I need to be involved in those things. I need to work in my passion. I need to get involved in that. But the aha moment is I owe that to my wife as a husband as well, with that same type of effort, input, energy, and time spent. I owe that to my 35 and 32-year-old adult kids just as much, one who has a family already and one who's still deciding if he'll ever have a family. And then I also am a grandpa now, two and a half year old that's from Bakersfield, which is quite a ways away. So that's a 4-hour drive to go visit the grandson or whatever. So I need to do a better job of my passion, spreading it out amongst being a coach, a husband, a father, a grandparent, and wrap that all into a bundle. So I guess I'm a Swiss Army knife. I can do it all. If sleep wasn't required, I'd probably have a little more time to pull all that off.
Love it, Coach. That's a great way to wrap this thing up and have a reflective moment as we move on to the next thing. And for all those of you that are listening, he is very serious in the fact that he always wants to learn something. So if you want his contact information, feel free to reach out and you can get connected. And he'll probably ask you a million questions as well. Appreciate you coming on today, Coach. It's good to catch up.
Glad I finally did this. And now I know it wasn't as painful as I thought it was going to be.